Welcome to Mindful Live 71. It is the 22nd of April in the year of our Lord, 2022. Welcome. I'm your host, Nathan Springer, the host for Mindful Live. Who else would it be? And it's nice having you here. Let's talk about the issues of the night, at least as far as has come across my attention. And it seems like in these last few days, the main issue on a lot of people's minds has been violence, because from the last weekend we had was the holiday weekend, and off of that holiday weekend there was a spike in violence, in murders, and then from that into the first week of school, we went straight from that holiday weekend right into the gas prices rising, right into this first week of school. And what would we see but a plethora, nice word, a plethora of school fighting videos. And no, you can't say it's old because you're seeing the mask on these children. They're obviously pretty recent videos, and they are all around. They are all around. I've seen more than I am interested in seeing even. And there is a question in there. There is, what do you think? Oh gosh. There is a question. There is a question in there. Here's a question. Is it that school violence is now becoming much more of an issue? Or is it that school violence was always an issue, and it's that the children now all have smartphones that all record, so now you could get multiple angles of the same fight and they would all upload it because they all want the most likes, etc. It's a strange thing. It's a strange thing. Now, even if it's getting worse, I think the fact, as I said in the contemplation today, the fact that all school fights now are now advertised, as it were. They know that they are performing in front of a global audience. And I find when I look at some of the videos of some of these fights, when you see how some of these children are acting, I feel like, yeah, they know and they are performing for an audience. They know that a camera, well, not a camera, that cameras are rolling. There are multiple angles to this event, and they are reacting with that in mind. Now, bear in mind, humans on a whole, we are social beings, and especially in the teenage years, in those formative years where you're trying to figure out where you fit inside of the society. Yeah, when you have the fact being that whatever happens here, how this fight is decided, how this action is decided, is going to be seen by our entire social group, being not just this small, not just this group of 30 people on the junction seeing me fight. No, all of the people online also, they're going to see me fighting too. How am I going to act now? And I don't think you'd act the same. I do not think so. And with it being that these are young people and they are already impressionable, they already do things much more with the social pressures in mind, what do we think is actually going to happen? And as someone said in the TikTok comments earlier, they said about whether it may be hierarchies trying to be reestablished as school is reopened. And I wouldn't doubt that. I heard a discussion I had with a teacher, and they were talking about schools reopening and the difficult reality that might be, because over the last 2 years these students were not out of communication. It's not like you're just throwing them back in and they may be confused and now have to get their footing again. It's not exactly like that. They would have actually been, in a sense, in more communication than they might have been in school. They were immersed in the online culture. How many feuds would have been made? How many rivalries would have been fueled? How many rivalries would have been fueled? And then, yeah, so here's something. Here's a reality. A funny reality. If you're talking about the online world, someone who has access to more internet, who has access to better devices, who has access to more time to spend on the internet, they may win an online battle. They may win an online bullying battle. They may seem like the victor in such a battle. But would that be the same kind of person who would win a battle in reality? Would the person who has wealthier parents, the better devices, more free time to spend on the internet, less responsibility in certain other things, would that person be the same person who would be at the top of the hierarchy in real life? Well, possibly not. So these things may really have to reorder themselves, and especially when it comes to males, because something interesting I've noted is that a lot of these fights were young men. Here's the reason I noted that. Because something that I've found, Kadir 99 Nathan, it's quite possible also that the gang and turf culture is spilling over into the school. That is for certain. There's no doubt about that. But I have noticed that it's young boys a lot in these more recent videos. The reason I have noted that as something of note is that before pandemic times, when school fights were rearing their ugly head, it really seemed to me that the girls were taking prominence. It seems like more girls were fighting in schools, but nearly all of, except for a few kicksy ones kind of way, but nearly all of the fights in that you're seeing now as schools are reopening are young men. And that to me does tell that reordering of ego and status and hierarchy business. It does kind of point to that more, because that's something that young men do. You see, young men battle each other physically, while women tend to do it more by reputation. Now, this isn't something sexist, it's just obvious biology. There's a biological reason for that, as Ronnie always likes to point out that I say often. The thing is, men are more physically strong and are more physically aggressive, while women are not. So generally, they battle each other on that reputational level. So I think on the female side, on the girl side, there may be some backlash to note in this heightened social media presence that probably isn't as obvious as the young men and isn't as volatile as the young men, but probably is no less dangerous in the long run. So looking out for what the effect on more young ladies might be in the long run, I think is a good thing to do. But for the young men who are now re-entering the school system and are trying to trying to put their dominance in position again, the problem is not the fighting, it's how far they're taking it. Maybe, as you said, the advertisement causes differences. It could be, because I understand what you are saying. Young men do fight more often, and it may be possible that fighting in and of itself in some young men isn't automatically such a horrible thing. I know some young men, when we were young, we had some fights. I mean, not play fight, like we were really fighting. We were angry with each other, and yeah, you got into a quick little scuffle, and we are good friends now. That got gone. It happens. But at the level some of these things are happening now, I am not sure if that would be able to be rectified so easily. Back to school was always stressful to many, added to that issues that COVID caused. All right, so yeah, it's school violence we are going to be talking about. And I thought it interesting to go back in time. Now, there have been articles, there have been studies, there have been commissions, there have been committees on school violence for a very long time in Trinidad and Tobago. But I'm just going back to the start of this current government stint back in 2016. And we're going to start with an article from back then. After billions of dollars spent by government over the years grappling with school violence. Indiscipline among students is one of the issues on the front burner when the Ministry of Education holds 2 national consultations. Bear in mind, as I said before, let me read the date. This article is from Saturday, February 6th, 2016. 2 national consultations this month, one in Trinidad on February 15th and the other in Tobago, to discuss a range of school-related issues. There are many issues plaguing schools in TNT: bullying, sexual misconduct, peer pressure, physical violence. The issue of indiscipline and violence has become a runaway horse. Videos of students fighting in classrooms, on the streets, and even with a police officer and MTS security guards have gone viral. 2016. 2016. 2016 is how long ago? Wow. 6 years. Wow. Just now, I'm just taking a moment on this one. 2016 was 6 years ago. I just have to take a moment. Wow. You don't feel old sometimes? We don't realize that kids aren't as oblivious as we think. They worry about their family struggles. Same situation, really. Yes, it is the same situation, really. I don't think the situation has changed much. Maybe there may have been a spike in it as the schools have just reopened, and the instances we were speaking about the hierarchies have to reorder and people have to reestablish their dominance and all that Nature and National Geographic business. But the fighting and violence and recording and nature of the violence and boldness of the violence has been part and participle of Trinidad's schooling culture for quite some time now. 2016. Over a week ago, there were reports of 2 separate incidents at 2 schools in South Trinidad where teenage school girls were assaulted in their classes by their peers. According to the Ministry of Education, 3,300 students were suspended in the period 2009 to 2010, and in 2012, 2,200 students were suspended. Former Education Minister Dr. Tim Gopi Singh said 700 of those students had to have extended suspensions. Yeah, that was 2016. Now we jump forward from 2016 another 3 years, 2019. School violence a plague. A parliamentary committee is querying whether there is a link between violence among school children and teacher punctuality and absenteeism from classrooms. The question is asked in its recent report by the Joint Select Committee on Social Services on Physical and Cyberbullying. The questions are revealed in the minutes of the JSCs, yada, 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 yada. Yeah, 3 years later, they're asking some of the same questions. 2019. JSC member, all right, let's see, stakeholders such as the NPTA and tutor also raised other issues, including grouping of female teachers by male students, which kept the teachers out of classes, the filling of hundreds of vacancies in the country's education sector, and whether students should be allowed to bring cell phones to school. To me, when you're seeing these questions, when you're seeing these committees, when you see the things that are being brought up, it nearly sounds like you could legitimately call our school system, our education system, dysfunctional. How do you mean male students are grouping female teachers and causing them to not come to class? What is that? What country is this? How does such a thing happen? And how is it allowed to happen more than once? JSC member Esmond Forbes, who is also Deputy Speaker and Tunapuna MP, said, with regard to evidence and punctuality of the teachers in schools, what role will that play with regard to violence in schools? If it is that we can get some statistics in terms of the attendance and the punctuality as we go along, if again there are no teachers present, it means that the children could have a field day. So is it that the teachers don't show up? Dylan Hate Stuff says, a dysfunctional government institution in this country? Unheard of. I can feel the sarcasm leaking through my screen. But yes, is the problem, as this committee was asking, that teachers are absent or are showing up late? Somehow I don't think so. I don't believe that's the problem. I don't believe the reason that students are being violent and fighting in our country is because the teachers don't show up to work or show up late. Good night, Empress Roni. You're late, but you're here. Welcome. We're talking about school violence and violence in general in the long-term sense. It's interesting seeing this Joint Select Committee member, Mr. Esmond Forbes, because I saw an article with him today as the Deputy Speaker, and it's not exactly related, but it is kind of related. I'm not lying, as a female hand was passing on some of them trying to touch me. Probably it should. But I was reading an article with this same Esmond Forbes, and this was in 2019. Now, we're looking at some of these stakeholders, the NPTA tutor. We would look just now and see the NPTA and how that is functioning. If the dysfunctionality around our institutions leaks into everything. So, this committee here was having a meeting to ascertain the problems inside of the education system, inside of the education institutions. And one of the main problems was school violence. One Mr. Esmond Forbes, the Deputy Speaker, was a member of that Joint Select Committee. And the name rang a bell because I saw an article with him earlier today. And the article showed him in action in his position as Deputy Speaker of our Parliament. How much can a teacher do nowadays? A teacher have to be really smart or have plenty belly nowadays. In a sense. But they do have some power. It's just that some teachers don't have the patience or time to really do all of that. Put out of Parliament. St. Augustine MP Khadija was instructed to leave the House of Representatives on Friday. Now, how often does such a thing occur? And if, knowing the rules of the Parliament, the highest office holders in our country cannot seem to behave, how do we expect students to do so? She got her marching orders from Deputy Speaker Esmond Forbes after she defied a ruling he made while a minister was speaking. At this stage, Amin made an inaudible remark towards Ford, who is the Deputy Speaker. He told Amin to leave the Parliament chamber for 5 minutes. Amin countered, "I'm not leaving here, man." Ford replied, "As a matter of fact, leave for the rest of the day." Now, listen, I don't actually know the whole nitty-gritty of this situation, but I just found that Mr. Ford moved very abrupt. I kind of like it. To be very honest, I kind of liked it. So Amin made some remark. Mr. Ford heard her. He said, "You leave for 5 minutes." She reasoned that, "I'm not leaving here, man." And he said, "Well, as a matter of fact, leave for the rest of the day." Amin continued to argue as she packed her bag to leave the chamber. Ford told her, "Please leave in silence." He noticed that Charles was leaving as well and told him to leave quietly. The Veritas resumed his contribution after Amin and Charles left. He lamented it is unfortunate. Listen. When you see the actions of these people inside of our Parliament, when you see the behavior that these people carry on with inside of our Parliament, and you see the dysfunction therein, how then, as someone said, the young people are very impressionable. How then do we expect the young people to behave otherwise? You are saying that you want them to behave where they follow certain stipulated rules. But from the very top of our governance structure in Trinidad and Tobago, the highest positions in this country, they don't follow the rules. They have to be put out of Parliament on a regular occasion. They have to be suspended. It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. And also, as another member inside of that GSC meeting back in 2019, another one of the stakeholders inside there, the NPTA. I was reading today about some of the bacchanal inside of that. You have an aggressive culture here. Violence is normal. Guys, don't forget to tap the screen. Thank you, Lee Foreverboard. Thank you very much. Make sure to tap that screen and hit that like button wherever you are viewing. Blessed Night Primary School Masterclass. Thank you for being here. We're going over now to the NPTA, which is another stakeholder inside of our education sector. Let's see if this dysfunction is only inside of the schools with the children, or if, as we see in our parliament, it starts at the parliamentary level. The NPTA, the National Parent Teachers Association, Concerned Parents Association, calls for clarity, more time for NPTA election. President of the Concerned Parents Association, Clarence Mendoza, has accused the interim committee of the NPTA of impropriety and called on it to say why entire school districts were prevented from participating in internal elections on Saturday. Last June, Justice Kevin Ramcharan granted an injunction to the association. In 2019, less than 2 months after the NPTA elections, the association's general council removed its national executive committee. Listen, nearly every association in Trinidad, once there is some power to be gotten inside of the association, bacchanal always ensues. Listen, it could be the village council, and I'm speaking from experience here. Sheesh, bacchanal evermore. A village council, once there's some money to go around. I have heard of village councils that hired some of the youths and they pass around the neighborhood selling little items that they made, etc. From the moment that there's a couple thousand inside of the treasury, all of a sudden big people start to come out of the woodwork and act a fool because there's some power and some money to gain from it. It's so strange. Anyway, the NPTA have bacchanal. Acting President Mendoza, who was named as one of the 14 defendants on Thursday, filed a judicial review process arguing he was not duly notified of the new election date in January 2020, so it was cancelled. So they fire the executive committee, they announce an election. The people who were supposed to go up for the election didn't even know about the election date, so they carried it to court. The court had to cancel the whole election. All that is bacchanal inside of the NPTA. Speaking during a media conference at Jenny's on the Boulevard, Mendoza claimed several members were ineligible to participate in the association's elections and no reasons were given. He added that the timing of the election seemed rushed and a list of eligible voters was not available. He was concerned that this could lead to confusion as voters were not clear on their status. There's no information, there's no list anywhere so you can check to see if your name is on a list or not. The Victoria district would have received a list. No other region received a list. On the list Victoria region would have received, 19 parents were banned from polling. 12 coordinators were banned. 2 schools were removed from the list, and that's one region. Listen, this is the PTA. This is the PTA. How hard should the PTA be? Like, why are we doing this to the PTA? What? Are you power hungry over the... What is wrong with you? How are you power hungry over the PTA? How? Listen, go and open a parlor. You could go and open a parlor, register it as a business, and name yourself as the CEO, COO, CFO, president, executive chairman, all those roles, and get all that power tripping out of your system. And then go on the PTA. Because power tripping is not the play. The PTA is not the place for power tripping, even though it kind of does line up, Power Tripping Association. And my experience of being around some PTAs, remembering back in the days, is that the PTA really does show you the characteristics of some of those parents out there. And when you look at the PTA and see how the PTA operates and how dysfunctional this seems to be, you could wonder, well, what is the surprise with the students? These are the parents. These are their students. 1 + 1 = 2. And if you minus that 1 from the 2, you would end up back with a 1 again. Public Relations Officer of his association, Shamila Rahim, said she has also felt more planning should have gone into the elections, noting the date and the venue at the Valencia Secondary School, one inconvenience to Muslims observing Ramadan. We have to bear in mind Muslims fasting for the month of Ramadan. Their last meal is done at 4:30 a.m. and they go without food until 6:30. Now you have a venue that is in the Valencia Secondary School. Couldn't it be somewhere centralized that will accommodate all? What about our South and Central units that have to participate in this election? No consideration is being given to them as well. Whether you're a Muslim, Christian, or Hindu, the commute back and forth to Valencia is rather difficult. Now, I actually kind of understand that. And it really does make me wonder the reasoning for placing the election in Valencia. If you're trying to elect something nationally, you're trying to get as many people in the nation, to say it like our opposition leader, former prime minister, to say you're trying to get as many people as possible in the nation to be able to vote in this thing. Schools from all districts, parents and teachers from all districts. Wouldn't you want a centralized location? Valencia is a difficult place to reach if you're not nearby. It is a difficult place to reach. So I understand that argument. Now, contacted for comment, interim president of the NPT, Zina Ramatali, dismissed Mendoza's claims and insisted the elections were above board. The reasoning that she claimed was only financial members of the association can participate. Financial units can participate, and according to the constitution, only financial members can participate in the business of the organization. So she's basically insinuating that the reason all other people who are not involved, and the reason they do not see their names there is because they aren't paying their member fees. Now, I don't know. I am not part of the association, but it makes you wonder if it's all just a convenient ruse where if you're in charge of the executive, you conveniently could, that member fees lapsed over the last year because of the pandemic and all of that, but you use that as a convenient ruse to get out there and make the election how you'd like it to be. I don't know. It could make you wonder because something seems suspect about that. Even if it's about paying members, then why Valencia? I don't see the reason for that. Why the Valencia part in it? And as someone said, our country is a violent society. That was the same reasoning our prime minister gave. And he wasn't just speaking about the violence in schools. He was talking about our society in general. So I believe the education system is dysfunctional. It's dysfunctional because our parliamentary behavior creates dysfunctional institutions from the very top, because the PTA creates dysfunctional institutions from the very top, because a lot of the institutions in charge of controlling the education system are all dysfunctional. If they're all dysfunctional, how do we expect dysfunctional institutions, dysfunctional groups, dysfunctional associations to somehow magically create a well-functioning system? That's just not going to happen. So the reason part of it is how it is because the system is dysfunctional. But that's only one side of it. According to our Prime Minister, some of it stems from our culture in general. We are a violent culture society, he said. Cabinet is going through the procurement process to get more CCTV cameras, and there ought to be consequences for secondary school students demonstrating violent behavior. So he covered first the CCTV argument. Now, what is in the public domain right now is that there was previously a contract for Digicel to supply some of the CCTV cameras. You left room for me to sign where? The cameras, there was a previous contract with Digicel, but that contract was under some scrutiny because the government has shares in B-Mobile. So if the government has some shares in B-Mobile, why would they be paying Digicel to install the cameras? And the government quashed the contract with Digicel, so now it's again in the tendering phase or something like that to bring back in more CCTV cameras. And the problem now with the existing cameras is that the majority of them are not functioning. So yeah, the opposition is bringing in those questions. The Prime Minister says we are working on it. He said in recent years, people have gotten their hands on firearms. On the rising murder rate, Rowley noted TNT's nature as a violent society. He said, in recent years, people have gotten their hands on firearms and heavier weapons, automatic assault weapons, and some of our people have been engaged in crime for profit. And it's something that's attracted the government's attention. And we have elements of state engaged in doing what is doable and trying to identify the potential for these crimes to take place and seeking to disarm people. Our violent culture. That's where the Prime Minister puts a lot of this blame. On the part with the children, he insists that one of the main ways for this to come about, while I understand that it's an environment of being locked up for 2 years and some children are releasing some negative energy, but the violence I've seen is unacceptable, he said. He said the Education Ministry is currently reviewing the process by which students who show violent behavior are restrained. You'll hear more in the future, but there ought to be consequences for violent behavior, as well as providing support for children to reduce their opportunities to act out in violent ways. But the consequences, he does not believe, is going to be licks. He doesn't believe that it's about bringing back corporal punishment. So I'll ask the commenters here, what consequences do you think can be given to students inside of a school system, inside of a school atmosphere, inside of the school environment that would be useful as a deterrence method? The Ministry of Education has already noted that suspending students does not seem to work. And if you have students who are involved in gang activity, who come from downtrodden communities, whose family situations are not that ideal home, sending them to spend more time at home is not going to solve anything. So suspension isn't the solution. Expelling them might help the students who remain in school to be in a better atmosphere. They aren't around as many distracting elements as before. But if you expel those students, you don't disappear them from the society. You see, there has been a problem created in societies from the moment that humanity has become so populous that we can no longer exile people. There was once upon a time, listen, you behave badly, we exile you. Get out of the society. You go do whatever you want to do, but outside from here, you're exiled. Don't come back. But where do you exile people now? There is no free space that you could exile somebody to now. How do you do something about this? Taking away their recess lunch so they can't go have fun with their friends. Taking away their recess and lunch. Now, I believe there are consequences that would work. I do believe that. What I do believe also is that you need people capable of enacting these consequences, because it is not going to be easy. If you have an extremely disruptive young man, because they usually are young men, you have an extremely disruptive young man, and you say, well, what we're going to do is we are going to remove you from being able to access recess and lunchtime and leave you inside of this room for this period of time. Well, you have to get someone in that room with him to supervise him. You have to get someone who is willing to restrain him if he insists that I'm going to get up and walk out. What are you going to do then? Who is going to restrain them? Military schooling. That I have seen as a plausible argument. You know, I understand in societies why, like those Vikings I understand why they named children their surnames after the parent. So whenever a child does something, it falls directly on the parent. I understand that. And I think a lot of this has a lot of that to do with it. I think a lot of the consequences need to be aimed at the parents. I honestly believe that. I know it may be a controversial take, but I don't think it is really the state's job the state's responsibility to discipline children. I think it's the state's responsibility to ensure that citizens are not harming other citizens. So if you as a citizen create a little gremlin and your little gremlin is harming other citizens, then you are responsible for your little gremlin. I actually believe that some of this should fall on the parents. I believe so. Now, I don't know necessarily the full reality of how something like that would work if you would be pressing charges against the parents for school violence. I don't know. That might not be ideal, but the parent has to be more involved. The parent who, because many of those children who are in all of those fights, their parents don't show up to school. So we need to find a way to discipline the parent. And you need to show up to school. You need to handle this young person. If you cannot handle this young person, then you are giving them over as a ward to the state. And that's the reality of that. And you would have to face the consequences of child neglect. I think that's where the consequences should be. But the single parent home will be hit hard. I am kind of glad that you brought that up, because that is where I'm going next, to a single parent home. And this was the story I was saying that we were going to cover, an actual crime story. That would be very dangerous to children suffering from abuse though. Everything is dangerous to children suffering from abuse. I don't buy that. I don't buy, like, if you hold parents responsible, that the abusive parents would somehow really abuse their children now. No, they were abusers anyhow. They were abusing their children anyhow. So if we hold them responsible, what that might do is now we may be able to identify more clearly who those abusers really are. That's a kind of social credit score policy. I don't think so. I think that is full free market, a more full free market. We consider children as property of the parents. I know many people may not like how that sounds, but that is the way you consider it. A child, who owns this child? Well, God, but the parents. You belong to your parents. And if your property is harming someone else's property, it is your fault. One of the key main topic is the vacant father figure in the homeboy brother. It's not just the vacant father figure. It's not only about fathers. It's about families in general. It's about dysfunctional families. Just how we have dysfunctional school systems, we have many dysfunctional families. Now here's the story. Murder victim's father pleads, don't give up on your sons. Ishigona's father was left to wonder what else he could have done to steer his son away from criminal elements after he was shot and killed by unknown gunmen on Monday. Now, this was part of the shooting spree inside Enterprise, where there were drive-by shootings at multiple locations from the same vehicle. This was one of the young men who died. Moments after Devon Neals viewed... Wow, okay, so Instagram has kicked me out. If you were over on Instagram and I disappeared, my apologies. That's why Instagram does its own thing. Yeah. Moments after Devon Neals viewed the body of his son Akeem James on Thursday at the Forensic Sciences Center, St. James, he told Newsday he had spent the past 2 days pondering all his efforts to discourage his son from associating with a particular group in the area. He's now advising fathers who, like him, had given up to keep trying with their sons. Whoever has their own still alive, please try harder. Mine done gone. That was the only one I had. He has a little boy and I can't even face that child, because when I see that child, I see my son. I tried my best. I don't know what again. I've been talking to him as soon as I see him looking to take that road. I used to tell him either he go in jail or he get killed. James, 27, of Chrissy Terrace Enterprise was shot. We know that. He died at the Shikona Center. The single father said he had raised James since he was 8 months old. He believed his son's life would have turned out differently if his mother had been involved. She didn't play much of a part in his life. She dropped him off and never came back. Even now that he's dead, she wouldn't come together to give him a send-off. I told her, you never play a part. He's going home now. Help me get the birth paper together. This too is a problem for her. Now, when I reached this point is when I was like, yeah, that's some stuff. But a bullied child reporting it could be abused for drawing attention to the abusive parent. Abusive people get more aggressive when fearing being discovered. I don't care. I understand what you're saying, but what is the relevance of that? So criminals do more crime when they know they're going to be discovered. So no one should reveal criminality. Bullies bully more if they know they're going to be discovered, so no one should report the bully. Like, I understand what you're saying, but that is not an excuse. It's to just walk lightly over another topic I regularly hear a similar reasoning used for is this very controversial topic to some, abortion. And the reasoning given is that if abortion is not legalized, that many people are going to do it illegally. And I don't think that's a reasoning for anything. If you have a moral justification, well, fine, give that. But that is an illogical premise. If you make murder illegal, then all the murderers are going to murder people illegally. Well, duh, that's what happens when you make something illegal. If you make it that someone has to report something like this, it may cause some of those abusers to be triggered. Well, okay, that's what abusers do, but by them being triggered, they will reveal themselves more than likely. So that's a positive for society as far as I see it. But when I read this, and the part that took me is that he's talking about help me get the birth paper together. This young man was what? 27. And he did not have his birth paper organized. There are people growing up in families extremely dysfunctional. Some of us who our birth paper was there before we even celebrated a month properly. Our parents already so happy that we entered this world and proud of us existing, ran down to the red house back then and lined up and did everything they had to do, and your father was proud to put his name on your birth paper, and etc., etc., etc. Some of us who grew up with that as a reality, someone at 27 not having their birth paper seems extremely strange. And here's the other strange part with that. This young man at 27 would have been responsible for himself for some time now. He could have gone and gotten it or seen about that to some extent for himself. But the dysfunctionality of an entire family, some women, this is the father speaking again, and bear in mind this man is speaking obviously in a distraught position also. Some women not fit to be mothers. He used to always try to reach out to her, no matter what. He really loved his mother. Neil said the family has been having a hard time dealing with the murder. He himself wasn't shocked by the killing. I started to get a vibe when I see certain people around him, and I told him I don't want any liming near the dog kennel near the house to try to break up the gathering. I keep feeling like something was going to happen, and so said, so done. I come out to feed the dogs and they were liming. He see I was vexed, and then we just hear shots. It was never in him, it was his environment. And most times single fathers are stuck in a particular environment because we don't have the resources to move to get out. The best I could have done was stay and try. Neil said he himself barely escaped with his life as a bullet grazed his left arm. The faster this is over, the faster I can heal from it. That's what I want now. Hannah, I found this article legitimately, honestly, very sad. This is one of the sadder articles that I've read in the time I've been reading quite a bit of news. It's very sad. You're seeing the realities there. The fault of circumstance. Punishing parents for their behavior, for their child's behavior, might not bring light to the... I'm not sure. Good night, Hallie89. Nice to have you here. But yes, this indeed was one of the saddest articles I've read. A single father saying that the difficulty he was in was that he didn't even have the resources to move, although he wanted to. He saw the direction his son was going in. He was attempting to stop it. He tried his best, and he still could not. Now, who knows how much better could have been tried, but the reality is, as far as the father is concerned, as far as he's concerned, tried his best, and his son still ended up dead. Hey, Lincoln Foxtrot. Let me write down your name, Mr. Lincoln Foxtrot, because I was trying to remember for the life of me what was your name on TikTok again, because I remember that I wanted to contact you for something and I just wasn't remembering. But I'm glad you popped up so I can make a note of that. But yeah, in a situation like this, what can be done? What can be done? A single parent, the other parent has no interest in helping. They live in an environment where the environment is a constant negative draw on their child. They do not have the resources to exit from that environment. What do? How is that solved? And the father said here, it was never him, it was the environment. It was never in him, it was his environment. And I think that might be the truth for the majority of people. I think that might actually be the truth for the majority of people. It's a lot of people, it's not them, it's the environment. But a lot of us together make up our environment, and as we all give in to the environment, we become the environment, and we become the pressure that pushes other people to give in to the same environment yet again. It's the self-defeating cycle. And how is that cycle stopped? How do we stop that? Now, as to the origins of it, there's one more piece that I'd just like to browse over before we finish, to get into the origins of this. Where did this all come from? How come our society is so violent? Now, there's a factual matter that I think a lot of people shy away from, that I think is a pertinent matter to recognize. In much of the Western countries, the black population is overrepresented in violent crime. Violent crime. Now, violent crime isn't the only crime there is. That doesn't mean that they are more likely to be criminals. It just says the type of crime they are involved in. Now, the thing with violent crime and poverty is that, generally speaking, what poverty doesn't make you commit crime, but poverty limits the kind of crime you can commit. So there's a reality that if you're poor and you are tended towards criminality, the kind of criminality that you do would be violent crime, because it is what is available to you. While if you are wealthier and you're tended towards criminality, well, you might be a politician. And it may be part of the reasoning that black people are overrepresented in violent crime, because due to historical factors, black people may be overrepresented in poverty-stricken areas. And who knows, that may have something to do with it. But there is a history there. We are violent because we stop disciplining our children and our neighbors' children. Partially. I think that I honestly do believe that is part of the reason, that part of the reasoning is that in modern times we seem to have leaned too far on the other side, where discipline somehow seems like a bad thing now, and no one should ever be told that they're doing something wrong. There's nothing wrong you can be doing. The only thing wrong you can do is tell somebody that they're doing something wrong. That's the only way we do things wrong in modern times, and I think that's a disaster waiting to happen. In fact, it's a disaster that is happening right now. That's where the original term white collar crime originated. Right. Now, there was a study on this, scholarly study, an entire journal done. Post-colonial structural violence, a study of school violence in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, let me just read this abstract for you of this study. You could go find it if you're so interested. But let me just read this abstract, and you could take note of this when thinking about the foundations of school violence. Where did it originate from in Trinidad and Tobago? The Caribbean region per capita is one of the most violent in the world. Trinidad and Tobago, an economic powerhouse, has been bedeviled by violence. Unsurprisingly, school violence has escalated. However, there's a paucity of data. In this case study, I employed a critical peace education and post-colonial studies framework to examine how school violence is conceptualized. The research site, a product of post-colonial educational expansion, is a co-educational secondary school in Titi and is nationally stigmatized for its violent notoriety and persistent academic underperformance. Observations, yada yada, he spoke about how he collected the data. My data illustrate how youth are the main analytic unit in the discourse around school violence, a discourse from which the structural role of the school is mostly omitted. What he is basically saying there, a lot of mothers are aggressive to their children. It's very visible at the school drop-off. That's aggression throughout the society. But what this person, Mr. Hawkim Williams, who wrote this journal, was pointing at there is the colonial repercussions. The colonial repercussions. So, yeah, we regularly focus on the students as the focus point in looking at this violence. How did he phrase it? With his illustrious language. Youth are the main analytic unit, which is true. We often analyze the youths mainly. But it's not just the youths. We also have to analyze, as part of this, the school system in and of itself. And is this school system that is a relic of our colonial past, is this school system helping to feed into the same kind of violence that we are seeing? Is the nature of how this school system is structured and crafted helping to create that? As well as another thing that is left out of the discourse is the lingering impact of contemporaneously bifurcated educational system, of a contemporaneously bifurcated educational system that was created during the colonial era. These omissions may serve to reinforce or perpetuate TNT's class-stratified society. This constitutes discursive violence, but more specifically, as its iteration in this case study, post-colonial structural violence. Such discursive violence is both a neo-colonial product and enabler of the structural violence that maintains educational inequity in TT. Now, if you are familiar with a certain kind of language, you would see it coming straight off of that bit of a document as being that kind of social sciences studies, but I do think they have a point. The post-colonial structure of our schooling system, of our education system, that worked along with the remnants of colonialism to create class-stratified schooling in a public schooling system. So, for example, in the United States, in many other countries, there is class stratification in schooling, but very often that is based on geography. So, if you have a high class school that is a public school, it's because it's a school located next to a high class area. If you have a low class school that is a public school, it's because it's located in a low class area. But in Trinidad and Tobago, the high class and low class schools have nothing to do with location. We have created a system that allows stratification based not only on educational attainment, but also on class level, because let's be plain and honest. Go through, if you know someone wealthy, someone who is wealthy, how many of their children do you know end up in junior sex, whatever they want to name them nowadays? We know them as junior sex. You know which schools were the junior sex and senior sex. Let's not mama guy ourselves. So how many wealthy people you know whose children end up there? So don't try to tell me that it's just a matter of education. Now, I am not of the belief that we could somehow kill all hierarchies and everyone would all of a sudden be equal and at the same level. That's not true. Everyone is different. But wealth isn't necessarily a correlator to education or IQ level or intelligence. So the fact that schools at a certain level have a certain class of people only in it, and if you look in poorer communities, it's nearly like you have to get a lucky scholarship to end up in a prestige school, while they are the majority of the people that fill up a lot of these junior sex and senior sex. You'd understand that something inside of this colonial system did create a class stratification system inside of our education system. And I will not doubt that has something to do even with the school violence, because the reality is in Trinidad and Tobago, school violence is not an all-present problem. School violence occurs in most schools, but it is really a problem in a minority of the schools. A lot of schools do not suffer with that level of school violence. Many people would go to school every day for 7 years and might see one fight if they're lucky. Some schools barely had any fights. I know of some schools firsthand where inside the school that didn't have any fight, but the moment you exit, well, another school, one of the junior sex, would engage in the fights with this school, or rob them rather. And I think that does have some remnants of the colonial class stratification system. Now, how exactly do we get rid of it is another question. And even on the question of IQ with these schools, of intelligence, of how smart people are, that people go to the prestige schools because they're smart. Here's something. I was reading up about IQ recently and on the studies on it. Now, IQ is real. It is real. There is something such as general intelligence. And if you generally have more general intelligence, you are generally able to be more successful at various different tasks. Granted. However, the IQ study isn't as fully clear as some people would like to make it seem. If you look at the research that created this whole IQ studies, if you look at the research that created intelligence, created how they look at intelligence, what actually happened is basically they look for the people who were performing best, or for the people who were at a certain level in society that they wanted, and they figured out the questions that these people could answer best, and then said the people who couldn't answer those questions best are not necessarily intelligent. So what that actually isn't fully a measure of general intelligence. It's a measure of how good you are at figuring out things that people who are generally successful in this society are at figuring out. It's a comparison between how well you could figure out common things that are common in successful people. That's all that the intelligence is. But the thing with that is there are things that are common in successful people that are not necessarily because of how smart they are. Success isn't only determined by how smart you are. A lot of the times it has to do with your parenting, with your family, etc., etc., etc. So a lot of these tests that may make some people seem like they're unintelligent, or this person just dunce, or this person not smart, then is it really that they're not smart, or is this test really just showing that they have had an unideal upbringing? Because if you look at those tests, you'd regularly find that people who are not smart somehow seem to be correlated with single parent households. How is that? So, yeah. That's all I have for now. How do we solve this? How do we solve this problem that is exacerbated by our dysfunctional institutions, starting from the very top, with our parliament itself being dysfunctional, with the PTA itself being dysfunctional, and the school system itself being dysfunctional? How do we solve that? Then how do we solve it with the family structures being dysfunctional in our society, with single parents? Like, okay, if we had a very functional system as I proposed, maybe we could punish the parents for some of the children's wrongdoings, but how do we solve for that with dysfunctional families where some of the parents are single parents and they're struggling, trying their best to figure things out, and it still isn't working out in the way that they want it to? How do we solve for that? And then, compounded on all of that, we have the dysfunctional institutions, we have the dysfunctional families, and then we have the historical hurdles that we have to already clear. Historical hurdles that were placed on us before most of us even came into existence. And these historical hurdles are created inside of the systems that we exist in. How do we solve all of that? You see, want a PM that graduated from Woodford Square. We need a cultural revolution without the mass murder part. I agree. That's what we need, a cultural revolution. And if you want a cultural revolution without mass murder, I'll say this before we go. Let this be my closing statement. I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained. And do tune in next Monday for the next Mindful Live. But this is my closing statement. I agree with what Curvon is saying over there on TikTok. We need a cultural revolution without the mass murder part for these things to change. Nah, Rooney, this week has been a tiring week. That's why there was no afterlife this week. Don't worry, next week we would have those afterlives again. Can't you see it in my eyes? Do you not see the tiredness in my eyes? But next week we would be with the afterlife. No, it's not over, Chiny Douglas. It just was on hiatus for this week. But yes, my closing statement. How do you get a cultural revolution without the mass murder? Religion. Ronnie, stop it. But yes, religion, faith. That is how you do it. Go look at cultures that changed suddenly. Real change across the entire culture without killing everyone. Always religion. Belief structures. And the reason I say religion and don't just leave it as general as belief structures, because it needs something that has some amount of power. That's the word I would use, of power. And belief structures don't have the same impetus that religions have. So yeah, if you want that cultural revolution without the mass murder, religion is your key. The modern person is unwilling to accept that conservative answer. They could be unwilling to accept it, but it is factual. And accepting a fact or rejecting a fact does not change it from being a fact. But that's all I have for now, folks. I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained, as I previously said. And I will see you again Monday. Thank you for tuning in. It was my pleasure. Facts over feelings. But feelings don't care about your facts either. Peace. Good night. Laters.